The relationship between nations, as depicted in ancient texts, often transcends mere historical record. Within the biblical canon, the destinies of various peoples are frequently intertwined with divine purpose and prophetic utterance. This exploration delves into the complex interplay between ancient Persia, modern Iran, and Israel, as understood through a scholarly lens of biblical interpretation. The concept of national destiny, particularly concerning these two entities, has captivated theologians, historians, and political analysts for centuries. It invites a rigorous examination of scriptural passages, historical contexts, and the diverse hermeneutical approaches applied to them. Our aim is to present a neutral, objective analysis of these interpretations. This discourse will navigate the historical interactions between these civilizations, as recorded in both biblical and extra-biblical sources. We will then proceed to dissect key prophetic texts that are often cited in discussions about the future roles of Iran and Israel. The objective is to illuminate the various perspectives without endorsing any singular theological or political viewpoint. Understanding these narratives requires a careful distinction between historical fact, theological interpretation, and contemporary geopolitical application. The biblical texts themselves are products of specific historical and cultural milieus, reflecting the concerns and worldviews of their original authors and audiences. Their application to modern nation-states demands careful consideration. The biblical texts contain numerous references to Persia, often under its ancient name. These references span historical accounts, wisdom literature, and prophetic books, each contributing to a multifaceted portrayal. The most prominent mentions occur in the books of Isaiah, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Daniel. In Isaiah, particularly chapter 45, Cyrus is explicitly named as God's instrument, chosen to fulfill divine purposes even before his birth. This remarkable prophecy attributes to Cyrus the role of liberating the Jewish exiles and facilitating the rebuilding of Jerusalem and its temple. This passage is foundational for understanding the biblical view of Persian sovereignty. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah provide detailed historical accounts of the post-exilic period under Persian rule. They chronicle the return of the exiles, the reconstruction efforts, and the challenges faced by the nascent Jewish community. These narratives consistently depict Persian kings as granting decrees and providing resources for these endeavors. The Book of Esther, set in the Persian capital of Susa, offers a narrative focused on the Jewish community within the empire. It illustrates the reach of Persian authority and the internal dynamics of the royal court. While its historicity is sometimes debated, it undeniably reflects a period of significant Jewish presence within the Persian realm. The Book of Daniel presents Persia as one of the great empires in a sequence of world powers. In Daniel's visions, the Medo-Persian Empire is symbolized by a bear or a ram, succeeding the Babylonian Empire. These symbolic representations place Persia within a broader eschatological framework preceding the Greek and Roman empires. These diverse biblical references establish Persia as a significant player in God's historical plan, particularly concerning the destiny of Israel. They lay the groundwork for later interpretations that seek to connect ancient prophecies with modern geopolitical realities involving Iran. The biblical narrative consistently emphasizes Israel's unique covenant relationship with God, a theme central to its identity and destiny. This covenant, initiated with Abraham and reaffirmed through Moses, promises land, nationhood, and a special relationship with the divine. Despite periods of disobedience and exile, the prophetic tradition consistently points towards future restoration. Prophecies of restoration are abundant throughout the Hebrew Bible, particularly in books like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. These texts speak of a future gathering of the scattered exiles, a return to the land of Israel, and a spiritual renewal. They envision a time when Israel will dwell securely in its homeland, fulfilling the ancient promises. Ezekiel's vision of the dry bones, for instance, powerfully symbolizes the national resurrection and spiritual revitalization of Israel. This prophecy is often interpreted as foreshadowing both the historical return from Babylonian exile and a future, more complete restoration in the end times. It underscores the enduring nature of God's commitment to His people. The concept of the land is inextricably linked to Israel's destiny. Prophecies frequently describe a future period of peace and prosperity within the Promised Land, free from external threats. This territorial aspect is crucial for understanding the geopolitical dimensions of biblical prophecy concerning Israel. Among the most frequently cited prophetic texts concerning the end times and the nations surrounding Israel are Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39. These chapters describe a massive invasion of Israel by a coalition of nations led by a figure named Gog from the land of Magog. The identity of these nations, particularly Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, and Beth Togarmah, is subject to intense scholarly and theological debate. Many interpreters identify Persia in Ezekiel 38:5 with modern-day Iran, given the historical continuity of the name and geographical location. This identification is a cornerstone for those who see a direct link between these ancient prophecies and contemporary geopolitical alignments. However, this interpretation is not universally accepted. The coalition described in Ezekiel 38 is depicted as coming from the far north to attack a regathered and prosperous Israel. The purpose of this invasion, according to the text, is to plunder and take spoil from a people living securely. God's intervention is prophesied to be decisive, resulting in the utter destruction of the invading forces. The theological purpose of this dramatic event, as stated in Ezekiel 38:23, is for God to demonstrate His holiness and make Himself known to the nations. This eschatological battle is presented as a climactic moment in divine history, revealing God's sovereignty over all earthly powers. Interpretations of Ezekiel 38:39 vary widely. Some scholars view it as a literal future event, directly applicable to modern nations. Others see it as a symbolic prophecy, representing any future attempt to destroy Israel that God will ultimately thwart. A third perspective suggests it may have had a partial fulfillment in ancient history, with a future ultimate fulfillment. The debate surrounding the identity of Gog and Magog, and specifically Persia's role, highlights the challenges of applying ancient prophetic texts to contemporary geopolitical realities. The text itself is rich in symbolism and requires careful hermeneutical principles to avoid anachronistic readings. The identification of ancient Persia with modern Iran in eschatological discussions is a significant point of contention and analysis. For many, the explicit mention of Persia in Ezekiel 38:5 provides a direct link, suggesting a prominent role for Iran in end-time events. This perspective often shapes contemporary geopolitical analyses within certain theological frameworks. Those who hold this view frequently interpret current events in the Middle East through the lens of these prophecies. Iran's nuclear program, its regional influence, and its rhetoric concerning Israel are often seen as fulfilling or setting the stage for the events described in Ezekiel. This approach tends to be literal and futurist in its interpretation. However, other scholars caution against such direct and simplistic identifications. They argue that the ancient names in Ezekiel 38:39 may refer to broader geographical regions or tribal groups that have no direct modern equivalent. The fluidity of national boundaries and names over millennia makes precise identification challenging. The contemporary geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, particularly the strained relationship between Iran and Israel, often serves as a backdrop for discussions about biblical prophecy. Many observers, especially those with a futurist eschatological viewpoint, see current events as aligning with ancient predictions. Iran's revolutionary ideology, its pursuit of regional hegemony, and its explicit opposition to Israel are frequently cited as evidence for its role in end-time scenarios. The rhetoric from both sides is sometimes interpreted through the lens of biblical prophecy, leading to heightened expectations of conflict. The use of biblical prophecy in political analysis can be a double-edged sword. While it provides a framework for some to understand world events, it can also lead to confirmation bias, where events are selectively interpreted to fit a pre-existing prophetic narrative. This can obscure the nuances of international relations. Therefore, a critical and objective approach is essential when connecting ancient texts to modern geopolitical realities. It requires distinguishing between what the text explicitly states, what can be reasonably inferred, and what constitutes speculative interpretation. Applying ancient biblical prophecies to modern nation-states presents significant challenges. The world of the biblical prophets was vastly different from the contemporary globalized landscape, both geographically and politically. Direct correlations require careful consideration and often involve a degree of interpretive leap. One major challenge is the fluidity of national identities and geographical boundaries over millennia. The names of ancient peoples and lands do not always correspond precisely to modern nations. For example, Persia in antiquity encompassed a vast empire, not solely the modern state of Iran. Furthermore, the concept of destiny in biblical prophecy is often conditional, tied to the obedience or disobedience of the people involved. It is not always a rigid, predetermined fate, but can be influenced by human choices and divine intervention. This adds complexity to any deterministic interpretation. The temptation to force current events into prophetic frameworks can lead to misinterpretations and sensationalism. Such an approach risks undermining the scholarly integrity of biblical studies and can contribute to alarmist narratives rather than informed understanding. Finally, the ethical implications of applying prophecy to modern conflicts must be considered. Using biblical texts to justify or predict specific geopolitical outcomes can inadvertently contribute to prejudice, conflict, or a fatalistic worldview that discourages diplomatic solutions. A responsible approach prioritizes peace and understanding. The exploration of the biblical destiny of Iran and Israel reveals a rich tapestry of historical interactions, theological interpretations, and ongoing scholarly debate. It is clear that the biblical texts assign significant roles to both ancient Persia and Israel within their respective historical and prophetic narratives. The historical accounts highlight periods of both conflict and cooperation, with Persia notably playing a pivotal role in the return and restoration of the Jewish people after the Babylonian exile. This historical foundation is crucial for understanding subsequent prophetic interpretations. Prophetic texts, particularly Ezekiel 38:39, explicitly mention Persia as part of a future coalition against Israel. However, the precise identification of these ancient names with modern nations and the nature of the fulfillment, whether literal, symbolic, or already past, remains a subject of diverse scholarly opinion. The application of these ancient prophecies to the contemporary geopolitical relationship between Iran and Israel is fraught with interpretive challenges. While some see direct correlations, others advocate for caution, emphasizing the complexities of historical context, prophetic language, and the evolving nature of international relations. Ultimately, a nuanced understanding requires a commitment to rigorous academic inquiry, a respect for diverse interpretive methodologies, and an awareness of the potential pitfalls of anachronistic readings. The biblical narrative offers profound insights into divine sovereignty and human history, but its application to specific modern events demands careful discernment. The ongoing dialogue among religious scholars, historians, and political analysts will continue to shape our understanding of these complex and compelling themes. It is a dialogue that benefits from objectivity, intellectual humility, and a recognition of the multifaceted nature of truth.